At the time of recording this, Minneapolis is basically under occupation. ICE is terrorizing and murdering people on the streets of a country that flaunts its democracy to the world. ICE ushered in 2026 by murdering Keith Porter. We watched ICE shoot Renee Good to death in front of her wife. Then we saw Alex Preddy suffer the same fate. Tens of thousands of Black and brown immigrants have been ripped from their homes, locked up like animals, and abused without recourse. And that's not even a drop in the bucket as to what's transpired since Donald Trump took office for the second time a little over a year ago. It's been a while since I did one of these, breaking down my thoughts about everything happening politically, and I'll explain why that is. The point of my public-facing advocacy work has always been to create a more inclusive world for everyone. And the way I've tried to accomplish that is by getting people to see what they were missing, exposing the systemic problems in both the criminal system and the United States at large that I feared might otherwise be missed. I wanted to bring to light what was being done in the dark. Since Trump took office, the H-1B visa that I once depended on is effectively obsolete for people like me. My country, both my countries, the Bahamas and Nigeria, were placed on the visa ban list for no other reason than being Black nations, along with numerous other Black and brown nations. And that's to say nothing of how the US has been bombing ships in the Caribbean, kidnapping the Venezuelan president, threatening nations as they please, tearing apart families, detaining green card holding immigrants like Mahmoud Khalid for using their voice, kidnapping international students off the street, detaining and brutalizing US citizens who get in their way, and so much more. Everything that I thought would come to pass when I made this video after Donald Trump won the election has. In fact, it's worse. But the reason you haven't heard much from me isn't because fascism is here or because I told you so. It's because it's impossible to miss. The point of my public-facing advocacy work was to show you what you were missing, to identify the problems, expose the systemic inequality that makes way for those problems, and point you in a direction to change it. That's what I did with Rikers, police brutality, the prison industrial complex at large, systemic racism, Eric Adams, and more. But when everything is in the light and we can all see the fire, I don't see the purpose of me just continuously pointing at the fire we're all watching spread. So I had to reassess how I could use my voice meaningfully. I also wanted to make sure that when I spoke, I had something more meaningful to offer to everyone than grievance politics. If you don't know what grievance politics are, it's essentially when a person's politics, beliefs, attitudes, or actions are informed by their resentment for a perceived wrong or injustice committed against them. If that sounds familiar, it's because it's the entire basis for the MAGA and right-wing movement in America today. They perceive themselves as being wronged by any marginalized person that dare want equal rights in any capacity or form, that dares to reject white supremacy. Which is why, despite honoring and holding space for my own justified, righteous immigrant rage, I wanted to be sure that when I spoke, it wasn't coming from a place of grievance, because that's not helpful to anyone, nor is it what this moment needs. I decided that what this moment needs from me is clarity, because the cost of misunderstanding or refusing to understand where we're at and what's to come is people's lives. First, to the people saying this isn't who America is, or that Trump has turned America into something unrecognizable, that is incorrect. This is who America has been. Make America great again. Donald Trump's solemn promise has always been to take America back to the past. And that's what was always so frightening to everyone who knows American history. It's the reason that the majority of everyone who wasn't white voted against Donald Trump. 86% of Black people, 55% of Asian people, and 51% of Hispanic people voted against Donald Trump. White people were the only group where the majority of people voted for Donald Trump. All those Black, Asian, Hispanic, and otherwise brown people didn't necessarily vote for Kamala Harris because they love her or the Democrats. They voted for her because they understand the threat Trump's re-election posed, because they understood exactly what he and America are historically capable of. Donald Trump made clear to us that he didn't give a fuck about this democracy or its rules when his first term ended with the January 6th insurrection, where his followers intended to murder sitting politicians, including his own vice president. He made it clear when he claimed the 2020 election was stolen. He and his entire camp made it undeniable when we were provided a conservative manifesto in the form of Project 2025 that not only gave us a detailed step-by-step explanation of how they planned to bulldoze our democracy, they also told us exactly how they'd done it in the past. The past is important. History is what separates fear-mongering from a warning to heed. Those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it. May seem cliche, but the quote has stood the test of time because it's true. Unfortunately, some people made and continue to make the mistake of thinking that because they've experienced or survived something before, because something is not unprecedented, that it makes that thing any less dangerous, any less catastrophic, or any less worth avoiding. History is meant to serve as a warning. But we're past that now. The ship has sailed, and if you even think you're getting another free and fair election to change course, you haven't been paying attention. There is a lawless regime in power that will do absolutely anything that they want, and there is an opposition party that is neither prepared to put the fire out, nor willing to acknowledge how bad the fire really is. Because to do that would require accepting how long this fire will burn, how far it will spread, how many lives will be lost, how much damage there will be when the smoke finally clears, and who allowed the fire to spread. At least 51% of Project 2025 has already been implemented. In just a little over a year, the Republicans are more than halfway through burning our democracy to the ground. Americans have a hard time believing, if not outright refuse to believe, that nearly everything they've been taught about immigration is false anti-immigrant propaganda. And those lies legitimize an immigration system that harms all immigrants, including people like me who Americans have been tricked into believing are protected because we did it the right way. And eventually, that harm always reaches them too. So now, ICE is deliberately murdering and terrorizing not just immigrants. They've been doing that, and far fewer Americans cared. But they're specifically murdering white allies, white American citizens who are trying to help, protect, or just express concern for their immigrant neighbors. Because they're sending a message to white people that these are the consequences for trying to use your privilege for good, for refusing to support white supremacy, for caring about the humanity of your neighbors. That's why Renee Good and Alex Preddy were murdered. For the same reasons that people like Michael Schwerner, Andrew Goodman, and Viola were murdered in 1964. There is no resistance in this nation's history where the whites who stood along Black people, immigrants, foreigners, anyone other were not dealt with harshly by their own. From the abolition of slavery to the civil rights movement to the Kent State shootings to the Black Lives Matter movement. They are murdering people in broad daylight for all to see because they're making an example of them. Because that's what they've been tasked to do. We are less than a month into the year and ICE has already murdered 9 people, which might be shocking if last year weren't already ICE's deadliest year in 2 decades. Or if American police didn't already murder people daily. In case you didn't know, police killed 1,314 people last year. And they've already killed 49 people this year. The reason I'm making it a point to talk about the police the same time that I talk about ICE is because we are mishandling ICE in the same way we mishandled the police, because we are misunderstanding the issue in the same way. The reason police brutality happens every day all over this country is because violence and brutality are part of the gig. The reason a police officer could murder college student Dan Roy Henry and be awarded Officer of the Year that same year is because they are not acting outside of the scope of their actual job when they do that. The police are there to control poor Black, brown, and other marginalized populations. It has nothing to do with crime prevention or safety. It's about controlling the non-desirables and keeping them subservient. Knowing that police routinely kill people every day, yet somehow believing it's just an issue of training, that all we need to fix this problem is more training, more money, more body cameras, more bogus investigations, or more firing or prosecutions of the occasional cop, fails miserably to understand the issue. How many murders have we seen the police commit on body cameras that our tax dollars paid for them to have? How many murders have we watched on video only to have the government tell us an entirely different story? Too many, because the police are ungovernable in a police state, and that has always been the problem. And ICE is a function of that same police state. Alex Preddy was killed by a border patrol agent. You cannot separate ICE from the police. And just like the police, the brutality is the point. If you're horrified by what ICE is doing, you should be. And you should always remember that the deadly evil buffoonery we're seeing from ICE is a fraction of what we've been seeing from the police. The critical eye that you're willing to look at ICE with now should be what you apply to the entire police state. But most folk prefer to believe that the criminal system is about justice, that the routine injustices we see are just occasional mistakes, and that the system could be made fair with a couple of tweaks. The result of this flawed thinking is politicians constantly responding to police murder after murder with calls for bullshit band-aids like more training, more funding, and more cameras. And now that America's eyes have turned towards ICE's specific murders of Renee Good and Alex Preddy, we have people throwing around the same empty suggestions for improving ICE that they threw out for improving the police. Cory Booker introduced legislation aimed at holding ICE accountable by providing them with more training. If you think that what's going on can be corrected with a new law or a court order, you are not paying the fuck attention. ICE cannot be held accountable because they're not making mistakes. They're doing the job they were hired to do, Which is why the agents who murdered Renee Good and Alex Freddie are still at work. And Trump is on True Social calling their dead victims terrorists, thugs, and threats. And his media cronies are all repeating the same lies. AP News literally reported that an internal ICE memo instructed agents to forcibly enter people's homes without a warrant from the judge. If you're thinking like Cory Booker and you think the fire outside can be or will be extinguished with lukewarm legal policy, or anything that's efficacy is determined by Trump's willingness to follow the law, you need to wake the fuck up. You cannot reform an institution that is being commanded to break the law. ICE needs to be abolished, not replaced by the same institution with another name. It needs to be abolished, stripped of its funding. We are past the point of half measures and empty reform efforts. Reform presumes good faith. Fascism does not operate on good faith. The United States is rounding up Black and brown people with no respect to their immigration status, detaining them, abusing them, refusing to release them even at the court's request, sending them to countries they're not even from, and threatening Black and brown nations who don't comply with U.S. demands to take in people who aren't citizens of their countries either. The Republican sham of a Supreme Court is stripping us of right after right. Lower courts and federal judges are being brazenly ignored. Politicians like Minnesota State Representative Melissa Hortman are being murdered. The apps that were responsible for sharing the brunt of political news and advocacy that mainstream media wouldn't report on have all been bought by billionaires who are vocally and financially invested in this fascist regime and quashing all dissent. We need clarity about what's happening. This regime is waging war, both here and abroad, and it's going to get worse long before it gets better. The most dangerous thing right now is not fear, it's confusion. Clarity is not comfort, but it is the first step toward our survival.